I'm Kinga Phillips.
And I'm Justin Walter.
And we are always curious. And today we are extremely curious about socially responsible camping, adventuring, travel in a time when obviously travel is so incredibly limited. And the two of us, we make a living in the travel space as writers, as hosts, as journalists. So this is incredibly important and close to the heart for us.
Yeah, I know we've talked a lot about how the pandemic has really shifted the way we travel. And it's not only rocked the boat and kind of made everything so different for everybody, but as travelers, we really have to kind of look at how we're traveling in a socially responsible way. And Kinga, I know we've traveled together a little bit. We have also traveled independently. So what is kind of your top advice for someone who's looking to travel specifically during this time in the most responsible way?
Well, that's such a great question, because I think the first thing to consider is what we don't want to be doing, we can't be doing right now, which is essentially getting on planes, going internationally, doing all the things that people like you and I love doing. But there is so much to do that's closer to home that allows you to still get out and see the world and experience your space and be responsible. So one of the things that I personally love, that I've done a lot of during COVID times, is road tripping and camping. Yeah. And camping does not necessarily mean campgrounds, which are great, and I have been to a few, and I have to say that I really like the way they were set up. Usually right now it's every other space that's open, so you do get that distance and you're outdoors, which is nice. But what I love is dispersed camping. And
that's what I was going to ask you about, because whenever I'm watching your Instagram stories, it looks like you're camping in the middle of nowhere, that nobody's around. We both live in Los Angeles, California. I only camp going off websites. So how do you find these spots, and what tips do you give to people?
Well, so that's really a good question. So dispersed camping basically means being completely off the grid and away from people, which of course is the best social distancing. You're like, no one around for miles.
We were doing this before we had to socially distance.
I was. So now it even applies more, but it does take a little bit of work to find that. And really, I would say that the best advice is BLM, which is the Bureau of Land Management. Okay. And that is public land that is available to everyone. And that is really great, because you can go out and you can disperse camp, boondock, whatever you want to call it, which means drive off-road, find yourself a great spot. I do always recommend to people to research it a little bit, because there are some rules that apply to that as far as where you can camp and how. But also, if you look at like blm.gov, you will see all the Bureau of Land Management areas in the United States, and national forests is another place where you can also disperse camp, and you can look at national forest websites and see where areas are available. And then you take your car, your four-wheel drive if you have it, or a Prius like me if you have it, and you go off grid.
So BLM, I've never really heard of that. BLM, you can camp anywhere on those properties.
You can, but each area has its own rules. So it's very important. Like, for instance, you and I went to Carrizo Plain, which is Bureau of Land Management land, and each area has its own rules. So I looked up Carrizo Plain online, went to the site. We learned that day we could not have fires. There are sometimes fire restrictions. You should have a fire permit when you go, and look and see if there are any other rules. But mostly those are public lands that belong to all of us, that you can like have amazing experiences on and just social distance for miles and miles.
Yeah, and we actually used Hip Camp together, which was a fun trip where we went camping 2 hours north of LA. There was nobody around us when we were at our own campsite on a private property. Right. And I had never heard of Hip Camp before using that with you. And I've fallen in love with it, because it's these private properties that have these private campsites that don't have people on top of you. I've gone camping on the public sites in Los Angeles, and it is, like you said, there's sites on top of each other. So Hip Camp does a good job of finding big campsites, which I really enjoyed doing that with you.
Absolutely. And Hip Camp is such a win. It's basically the Airbnb of camping. So it's private land, people own it, and then they, some are more rustic, some are completely glamping. But the tip I would give people too, when you and I went, we went during the week.
Yes.
And if you go during the week, if your schedule allows, obviously you're going to encounter less people. And we had this spectacular mesa with sunsets, with like a tub for water, all to ourselves.
The sunset brought me to tears, and I sat next to Kinga, and we, no joke, were moved to tears with the beauty of it. And it just was so breathtaking how gorgeous this sunset was here in Los Angeles, or the greater Los Angeles area, and where we've traveled all around the world. And beauty is just right in our backyard. So I love this advice on dispersed camping in the California region. And if you're not in California, look up BLM for other places in national parks, like you said. So great advice, Kinga. Love it.
Thanks, Justin. Now, I know you had a really great tip, and I've been watching your Instagram, of course, and you've been getting out with some friends and having these weekend adventures, but you're also doing that really responsibly and really safely. And you had a really great idea about that.
Yeah, so I'm an extrovert, so I'm really filled and driven by being around my friends and people. I've had a small group of kind of like a network that I have done for my like COVID group. But then when I expand beyond that, doing these weekend trips away, like in Palm Springs, for example, over the 4th of July, we had a group of people that everybody agreed to get tested before going into the house. And after getting tested, self-quarantining. So when you get the negative result, you still have the negative result. So when we went into this house, there was about 10 of us where everybody in the house knew they were negative. And let me tell you, from a mental perspective of going into a situation where everyone was being responsible, being, clear and transparent about their testing, it also made the weekend more fun because we weren't constantly thinking about the fear of getting coronavirus. We weren't wearing masks when we were together in the house. So we had our own little bubble in Palm Springs. We chilled by the pool. We played board games all night, and it was such a fun weekend. And I'm definitely looking and interested in doing more weekends with friends where we're being responsible with each other if we're not in each other's tight group of circle of friends that we've been hanging out with.
That's such a smart idea. And I think you touch on the mental aspect of being able to spend time with your friends in a safe space where you're not constantly thinking about COVID. I think that is a win, Justin. I love that. I hope I get invited.
No, we're going to have to do it. And these weekends away, I realized I'm going on another one this weekend for my birthday, actually. And I'm looking forward to these trips as much as I looked forward to going abroad. You know how we used to pick up and just fly on a whim to Europe or to South Africa or the Oceania region. These weekends now are bringing that excitement level to me that I used to get from traveling abroad, which is really fun, getting to have that kind of travel excitement again back in my life.
And that's so important.
Yeah.
Be mentally sane during this time. I think that's
so beyond, I've watched your stuff, beyond just trips and camping and all these things, what's some other travel-esque or things that you have done or recommend that people can do to still kind of go beyond?
I'm going to share with you some of the tips that I've seen from my friends that they've shared with me that I actually love. One thing that I've had several friends talk to me about is taking master classes on time. I mean, on whatever subject that suits them at that moment, that really tickles their fancy. And everything from gardening to languages to butterflies, raising butterflies, to cooking, so many cool master classes to have online. And it got me thinking that in the travel space, it's actually a really great way to prepare for a trip that you want to take. So taking a class that maybe teaches you how to cook Italian food, or taking a class on a certain language, which is such a great idea because it gets you excited about when you get to travel again and get you in that headspace, and you're doing something to prepare yourself for it, but you're obviously doing it from the safety of your own home. So
it's a virtual way of traveling. I think that's the cool thing about it. And in addition to Masterclass, Airbnb totally shifted their Airbnb adventures. Airbnb adventures used to be where you would go and have hosts take you on an adventure in person. Now they're doing a whole online experience like Masterclass, where these hosts from around the world are teaching you to bake bread or a magic class or whatever it is. There's so many different things. But when you're doing it like the masterclass, you're actually traveling to the destination where this host is at and kind of getting a virtual travel experience that way. So I think those were definitely more popular in the beginning of the pandemic crisis, but this is going to be going on for a while. And I think that it's important to look at both these type of things to kind of get that outlet. If you had to do any experience or masterclass, what kind of thing do you think you would choose?
Oh my goodness. I was really into the butterfly one. My mom
That's awesome.
Monarchs in the backyard. Actually, my mom could teach a master class on that, but I just love that. It's something that you learn about, something that's interesting, something that gets you out of the headspace, like we said, of just constantly thinking about what's going on in the world. It's pleasurable, and that's what we're looking for.
And I think, I was going to say on that note is, I think you can do those things virtually, but you can also look to find them in your own hometown. I actually did that last weekend with one of my good friends who, you know, Emily, who we worked on Lost in the Wild together. And I'm taking a scuba certification course. I've always wanted to do it. I've been talking about it for years. I've done 2 discovery dives where you go with a certified dive master who you do an hour training and then you get to do it. I did it in Catalina and Bali. And finally, being stuck in Los Angeles, we looked up a company. There's a lot of companies that are offering either private scuba certification courses or classes where you're in a small group. We were in a group with 5 people total. We kept social distance rules during our pool and then our dive at Catalina. It's a 2-weekend course. And Kinga, basically I'm doing this to try and become you. And to be able to go on these scuba adventures with you. It's really cool. And like, I think this experience of living in the pandemic has allowed me to get my scuba certification, which I've been wanting to do, but haven't made the time to do it for years.
I think, Justin, that is great. I can't wait to dive with you.
Yes.
And the smart thing you said is sometimes they offer private classes. I have you taking the scuba classes. I have another friend doing a private free diving class. I have people doing rock climbing classes. And look, if you're even really concerned, you can ask your instructor, get a COVID test, show the negative result. You get a test, you're one-on-one with a person, and you can finally learn this skill that you've wanted to learn for a long time. So win-win, bravo, and we're going to get out of this whole thing and then go to Bali and go diving.
Yeah, anywhere. I mean, I'm excited to go anywhere. And that's the thing for me. When I did my 2 discovery dives, I've traveled the world like you have, and I feel like I see the world. But when you're underwater, you really realize that so much of our planet and life exists underwater, and I'm really robbing myself of the experience of fully investigating and exploring the world if I don't also do that underwater. So that's why I'm so inspired by people like you who do it all the time and who share that. And it's amazing. I'm so excited to get to do it with you. And it's really been fun to get to experience adventure and travel more locally than abroad and overseas. So it's been good.
I love it, Justin. Well, we are always curious.
Yes.
Today, we were always curious about getting out and experiencing the world. So we've got dispersed camping. We have going on weekend adventures in a safety bubble. We have taking master classes. We have taking in-person classes. So many things to do in a time when traveling abroad might not be possible.
Yeah, so always stay curious.
Always stay curious.